Measles has been detected now in 4 provinces with an outbreak of 10 infections in Quebec. Most of those are in children and most are related to travel. The measles, mumps and rubella vaccine, or MMR, is a standard immunization for children, but double checking that your child has their doses could be a little easier or harder depending on where you live. With us this morning to talk about vaccination records is infectious diseases specialist Dr. Isaac Bogosh. Good to have you with us.
Good morning, Anne-Marie.
So, from personal experience, we just learned this in the last couple of weeks. In Ontario, there is no one place you can go to actually find your full vaccination record or your child's vaccination records. So who's in charge of keeping track?
The best thing you can do is keep track of those records yourself. The best thing you can do is keep those yellow cards handy, make sure that they're in a safe place, and make sure you know where they are. Of course, it's 2024. Do we really need to rely on a flimsy piece of paper for a very important medical record? No, we don't. There are digital vaccine records that are available. There are several good products out there where you can store this information on your phone or on a computer in the digital sphere. For example, I'm just giving one example. There's a Canadian company called Can Immunize that has a very well-known digital vaccine record with a long track record of success. There's other products that will do just the exact same thing. So the best thing to do is keep your own records. However, depending on where you are in the country, these records are stored differently. So, for example, some provinces have a central repository for routine childhood immunizations. Other provinces, like Ontario, they don't, and this is really at the local public health unit. Can be problematic if you move provinces or if you move between different public health units. Sometimes they might not be up to date. Sometimes there's a disconnect between the vaccine card and the public health unit. In general, they're okay, but they're not perfect. So the best thing to do is keep your own record. Yeah,
in Ontario, we were surprised to find out that your doctor's office doesn't necessarily report when your vaccinations have happened. And when you go on the public regional website, it tells you it's actually a parent's responsibility. I think that's a surprise to parents, Dr. Bogosh, because I assume when you hand in your health card, that number links you somewhere.
We should have a program, and not only a provincial program, but a national program, because we're mobile. We don't stay in one place all the time. It would be ideal to have a national program. But yes, currently the responsibility does fall on the individual, and it can be tricky, right? Like, again, we're dealing with flimsy yellow cards that get lost or damaged or broken, or, I don't know. I think we can have a much better solution in the 2024 calendar year instead of using these yellow cards that we've used for decades.
Yeah, there are places in the country, as you mentioned, that do have a centralized system, and those are BC, Nova Scotia, Alberta, and Manitoba. Let's say that there's some sort of cross-communication with the records, and a child receives a double dose of a vaccine. What happens then? Is there any risk? Is there any danger?
We're dealing with these, typically we're talking about routine childhood immunizations like MMR or DTaP, and like these are vaccines that are given multiple times to children, and they're not a one and done vaccine. In general, obviously you can't make broad statements for every child, but in general, if someone is given an extra dose of these vaccines, in general, there's going to be no negative impact. Obviously, you don't want that to happen. You want quality medical records to ensure that there's no errors and people get the right dose at the right time. But if an additional dose is given, the vast majority of people will be just fine. But let's prevent that in the first place, and we need more streamlined healthcare electronic patient records so that we can avoid that. One other important point, though, that I don't think we touched on was that a lot of those provincial repositories are good for sort of your routine childhood immunizations. But what if you're going traveling and you get additional vaccines, like a hepatitis A vaccine, for example? That might not be, or depending on where you are, that will not or may not be included in those online repositories. So it's extremely important that you keep a medical record of what vaccines you received and when. And I think these digital products are a very good way to do that.
Really quickly, in Ontario, part of the reason we're doing this story is some public health units are now pushing parents to update their children's vaccination records, or they'll be suspended from school. So in the Waterloo region, for example, 32,000 students, that's a third of the region's student body, was told to update vaccination records or they would risk suspension. So the region's director of infectious diseases says he believes it's because of the pandemic, people fell behind. What other effects did the pandemic have on vaccinations in kids?
So a couple of things. One, of course, people fell behind as we saw disruptions in many routine public health bodies. I think the other thing to consider, too, is we saw the amplification of misinformation and disinformation online, and probably more people now than before are choosing not to vaccinate. And I think the other thing, too, is of those 32,000 notices, many people may have fallen into a similar situation that you described where, yeah, childhood vaccination was actually received, but it wasn't communicated to the appropriate public health authority, and this is a communication mismatch. So that probably accounts for a significant proportion of those cases as well.
Dr. Bogosh, thanks so much for this.
My pleasure.
All right, we did request a comment from the Ontario Ministry of Health about whether there's an actual effort on right now at the provincial level to push for updated vaccinations. They wrote, quote, "The Immunization of School Pupils Act requires parents to immunize their children against the designated diseases unless a valid exemption is on file. That is to be maintained by a medical officer of health to respond to and protect students in the event and cases of outbreaks in these designated diseases, including suspension as laid out in Section 6.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.